Well, hello, everyone. I have another amazing member of the group CALMA, Colorado Alliance for Latino Mentors and Authors. And this is a real treat for you today. This is Ricardo LaFore, and he is actually part of the successful in the San Luis Valley group as well. His family is originally from Cuesta, I believe. And so we have one of our own doing some really amazing things and has sort of been in the fight for social justice for a really long time. And so I'm really excited to have him here to share his journey with you. So I will let him tell us a little bit more about himself.
Well, good morning, everyone out there in cyberspace. I was born in Trinidad, Colorado, actually, to a single mom, and was raised by my grandmother and my mom. We're very poor, but I don't ever remember being unhappy or going hungry. We always had enough to eat, and although there was no male figure in my life as a father at the time, I was able to grow up relatively unscathed and try to become a productive member of society. I came of age in the 1960s, and I am a product of the Chicano Movement, that great social movement that began for me formally in 1968. It was a very, very tough year. The Tet Offensive had just occurred, and for the first time, even broadcasters began to suspect that we couldn't win the war in Vietnam. In April, Martin Luther King was assassinated, followed by Bobby Kennedy in June of that year. So it just seemed like the whole country was coming apart at the seams. And so I embraced the goals of the Chicano movement. It didn't take much for me to embrace them. I'd always known about racism. In third grade, my third grade teacher asked me why I hung around with a friend named Lee Duran, who was half black and half Chicano. But I didn't know that. And she told me in so many words that he's not like you and me. And I said, I don't understand. He said, don't you understand? She said, Shine's not like me and you. Shine is a Negro. And I mean, this sailed right over my head. I had no idea what she was talking about. But later, my mom told me that what she was trying to do was create division, and to create, instead of embracing our commonality, she sought to focus on what made us different, not what made us the same. Later in the 8th grade, my mom told me something. I guess she suspected that she didn't want her little boy going out into the world unprepared. So she told me, and I've always embraced this, that I was just as good as anyone else. Not better, but just as good. And so I carried that with me all of my life. You know, like I said, it didn't take much for me to get involved in the Chicano movement. I'd always been a kind of a cocky, self-assured, really in a way, more guts than brains, if you know what I mean. I mean, I was the kind of person who just wouldn't take, and I wasn't, no me dejaba. That's what my mom used to say, no te dejes. So, but my formal entry into the movement began in 1969 when I accepted the invitation of a young group of Chicanos students in high school who asked if I would be the spokesman to celebrate Cinco de Mayo in the school. And they liked me because I was articulate and I was able to speak well in public. So I said, sure. I mean, I didn't foresee any problems with this. I thought this is a slam dunk after all. What in fact were we asking for other than to recognize the culture of half the student body? But I was clearly surprised. The school board balked at our requests and began questioning our patriotism. Why do you want to celebrate a Mexican holiday? Aren't you glad to be in America? Why don't you celebrate an American holiday? And anyway, all kinds of nonsense like that. And one person on the school board who was of Japanese descent, do you think it'd be all right for me to celebrate Japan Day? And I said, sure, if that's what you want. I said, after all, we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and I don't think any of us here are Irish. And anyway, it was all for naught, and they were caught off guard. And they said, come back next Tuesday and we'll give you our answer. We'll take it under advisement is basically what they said. And so we returned the following Tuesday. There was about 7 or 8 high school students and myself. And come to find out that the school board meeting had been moved to the auditorium, which I thought was odd because there was never any 7 or 8 people who ever attended these school board meetings. And so we walked into the auditorium and there was 300 people
Whoa.
There. And they were all glaring at me for some reason. They had given me what we used to call in those days crusties, you know. And I said, what's going on? And the school board president called a meeting to order and said, there's only one item on the agenda, and we want to show these people what it is that we think of their proposal. Everyone who is against what Ricardo is proposing, please signify by standing. And all 300 of them stood up. And there I was. I mean, there I was, the first time up to bat, and I get shot down. I mean, I get my butt handed to me in front of the whole world. And it was a very humiliating, dark moment for me. But there's an old saying that, you know, you look into the abyss and you find out who you really are. And I think that was my looking into the abyss moment. And I thought to myself, if I found out after the meeting that they had begun circulating rumors in the community, it was a small town, that I was trying to lead these kids down a primrose path, radicalize them. We were influenced by communists, and you know, which, looking back on it now, any Chicano who was doing anything hadn't even earned his badge until someone had publicly accused you of being a communist. But anyway, that's what happened, and I think back now, and I remember thinking at that moment, I said, if they can do that to me, I mean, I'm a pretty smart, resourceful fellow. If they can do that to me, then they can do that to someone who is not as sharp as myself. So I guess you could say in that moment, I was reborn as a Chicano. And that was 51 years ago. And I often wonder what would have happened if they would have agreed, you know, to let us do the Cinco de Mayo celebration. I don't know what might have happened. I like to think that I would have still embraced the goals of the Chicano movement anyway, because the movement and I were perfectly suited for one another. But that was my formal entry into the Chicano movement. Like I said, my commitment continues to the present day. I can't do the things that I once did, just because of age and because of physical ability. But what I can do is I can teach. And so that's part of what I do at the Colorado History Museum. I do tours and lectures on the Chicano movement. I've also visited dozens of high schools and middle schools in the Denver metropolitan area. We do what we can, you know, given the kind of situation that we're involved in now, the pandemic. And it has also brought me in contact with Kimberly and Christina and Karen and Frank Davila to try and correct some of what I think is an omission, a serious omission of our history in this country. And so one of the best ways in which to do that is to document what it is that we do, to write about what it is that we do. So much of our history is lost, and some of that was due probably in part to the fact that we relied heavily on oral tradition, but that's not the case anymore. We're all we're all literate now. We can all write. We're all talented. We all have that gift, that natural gift of storytelling. So rather than rely on the spoken word, it has really come to the attention of CALMA, my colleagues and I, that writing down our history and sharing it with the rest of the world is the way in which we assure that we assume our proper place, and not just in the history of Colorado, but in the history of our country. So, like I said, so much has been lost. One of the eye-opening things that happened when I was doing these tours, and which at the History Museum on the Chicano Movement, is that I was stunned by how little people knew about the Chicano Movement. They didn't even know about it. I mean, you can ask anybody about the Civil Rights Movement. They'll quote Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and so forth, and that's fine. But there was a Civil Rights Movement here in Colorado. It's part of Colorado history. And the fact that our kids don't know about it is very, very sad to me, you know. So one of the things that I remember once I was doing a tour, and this kid, a white kid, just by some reason asked me why, when we get past Pueblo, all the names of the towns and counties start to change. You know, Pueblo, Alamosa, Antonito, Del Norte, Monte Vista, Las Animas, La Junta, Capulín, you know. Yes. And I told him why. I said that because prior to 1848, that part of Colorado belonged to Mexico. And so, I mean, I said, well, what do you think? Do you think some white guy came up and stumbled on Huérfano County and decided to call it Orphan County? Of course not. He called it Huérfano County because that was the language that was spoken at the time. And he you know, if you're a teacher, and Kimberly is a teacher, you know, that moment when learning occurs, when like a little light bulb goes off in the student's head. This kid goes, my God, that's absolutely correct. I never thought about that. And I said, yeah, that's a good lesson to learn. I said, why don't you know that? Why don't our teachers, or why doesn't our state or Department of Education recognize that we are the largest minority here, and yet people don't know about it? And that's why it's so important. What CALMA is doing is trying to encourage that kind of a dialogue that tells us, not only are we here, we've always been here, okay? And so that's kind of where I'm at now. I've had a remarkable career with some really high-profile jobs. I was the director of the Colorado Migrant Council for several years. I was a Head Start director in the city of San Francisco, where I went to college. And more recently, or I shouldn't say recently, in 1992, I went to work for a U.S. Senator here in Denver and became the district director, and did that job for 12 years and retired from the U.S. Senate in 2006. And shortly after that, I had lunch with an old high school buddy of mine who was retiring from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. And during lunch, he said, you know, you'd be great for FEMA, a reservist. And I said, no, I just retired. I don't want to go back to work. And he explained what a reservist does. He's just on call. And when you're needed, you go out for a month or two, and you do this work. And so in 2008, I went to work for FEMA as a Congressional Affairs Specialist and as a Spanish language public information officer. And I continue in that position, except that I suspect that my FEMA career is probably over as well, because I have been reluctant to deploy during the COVID era. So time will tell, but that brings me kind of full circle where I am now. Unlike everyone else, you know, affected by this COVID epidemic. But I have been able to meet people like Kimberly and others who we continue on our quest to try and get the written word out through CALMA.
Well, what an incredible journey so far. I do have a couple of questions. First of all, I apologize, but I do remember you saying that your family had come from Cuesta, but you said Trinidad. Is there?
My mom was born in Cuesta.
Ah, okay,
and,
that's right.
Yeah. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, my father, whom I never really met, was born in Cerro.
Oh, okay, cool.
And they moved north to Trinidad, which is where I was born. I love the Valley of San Luis. When I was director of the Colorado Migrant Council, we had an office there. And those, if people are listening from San Luis, my main person in Alamosa was a woman by the name of Angie Bernard, a wonderful, strong Chicana woman who bless her soul, she passed away far too prematurely. And also I was very active in the letter strike in Center, Colorado, which was led by another high school buddy of mine, Magdaleno Avila. And some of the people that I remember from back then, Patricio Gonzalez, who owned a tavern there in Alamosa. I just loved the whole Valle de San Luis, and I've been all over. You know what? I'm so sorry. I've never been to Capulin. I'm always talking about Capulin because it's a town named Choche. It's just too delicious to yeah. But I've been Manasa, Antonito, all of them, La Jara. I just have wonderful memories of San Luis. In fact, I wrote a poem about it. I think I sent it to you, Kimberly, and I also sent it to an old friend, Ken Salazar, who one of our prouder moments when he became the. At that time, he wasn't U.S. Senator. He was the Colorado Attorney General, and I saved his note that he sent back to me about the poem El Valle de San Luis, Mi querido Valle de San Luis. So I was born in Trinidad, and then actually at age 12, you got to understand how the social services worked at that time. They decided that my grandmother was too old to control the kids, me and my brother Antonio. And so I had to go live with my mother, who had since remarried and had moved to Las Animas, Colorado, which is in the Arkansas Valley, 100 miles to the east of that. And so I went to high school in Las Animas. And that's really where the movement came to me. The seeds of the movement were planted in Las Animas. Like I said, I think I would have been a movement warrior, irregardless of the school board meeting. But the seeds were planted there. I began to make trips to Denver to visit the Crusade for Justice. I went to the National Chicano Youth Conference at the Crusade. Started attending a lot of rallies, meetings, marches, and so forth. And then in '73, just about the time when everything I could possibly do in Las Animas had been done, was recruited by the Colorado Migrant Council to be a career counselor for migrants who were settling out of migrant farm work and trying to become trades craftsmen and secretaries and so forth. And that just opened up a whole new world for me, moving from a little small town of 3,000 to Denver and continuing the work that I was doing. In a way, even more so, because the things that people objected to in Las Animas, that was the reason that the Colorado Mine Council recruited me, was precisely because of my activism and because of my ability to organize and to speak out against injustice. So it was a perfect marriage for me.
Yeah, it's a huge change when somebody actually embraces the work that you're doing. It makes a world of difference. One question I have on this note of the Chicano movement, the word Chicano, our identity, I think, is really a fascinating thing, and that's been sort of my life's work. And I remember when I started teaching in the Denver metro area, and I had a lot of Latino students, many that were first generation or recent immigrants from either Mexico or other parts of Latin America, and they would call me Chicana. And I would ask them, well, what do you mean by that? Why do you use the term Chicana? And for me, I had had this education at Colorado College about what that the civil rights movement was and what it meant, and all of the work that had been done and where that term came from. So I wanted to hear what their thoughts were on that. And so they were like, well, your family's from Mexico, but you were born and raised here. And that's why they called me Chicana. And so we had an interesting dialogue about where the term Chicano and Chicana actually came from in the 60s and 70s and what that meant to the movement. And so tell me, what does that word mean for you when you use it?
Well, first and foremost, Chicano is a political term. It is, it's as near as I can understand. It's the word originates from the ancient Mexicans. The Aztecs were called Mexica, and if you were a Mexica, you were a Mexicano. All that notes to me is that the word meant was abbreviated and became Chicanos or Mexicanos. Mm-hmm. It actually back in Trinidad, even prior to the movement, we used to use the word Chicano, and it was more of a kind of a in-your-face kind of term for us at the time. It was like a declaration that we were who we were, and it was like a polemic against society. But for me, most importantly, is that is a word that we chose for ourselves. So we named ourselves Chicanos.
Rejection of
the Census Bureau every 10 years. Yeah. Every 10 years, the Census Bureau had a new name for us. I mean, we've been called Spanish American, Mexican American. The closest one to that would be to Chicano would be Mexican American. But there are people from northern New Mexico, southern Colorado, who claim their heritage direct from Spain. I take no issue with that. I actually take no issue with what people call themselves, period. Even Latinx, which is enjoying some kind of a movement now. If people want to call themselves Latinx, that's fine with me. I think people probably had the same reaction to Chicano. What's important to me is the goals. I categorize action in two ways. One is that I would compromise on tactics, but not on principles. A tactic is a way of getting to the goal. Let's say that the goal is to get to Denver from San Luis. And some people walk, some people drive, some people take an airplane, some people take a bus. I don't care. The goal is to get there. That mode of transportation is nothing more than a tactic. So if I want to document the history of our people, and people want to call themselves Latinx, Spanish American, but they're still writing about the history of our people, I don't care what they call themselves. Chicano is a personal choice for me. Chicano is a term of liberation for me. Chicano says to me, I am not going to fit into your little world how you want me. I am who I am because of this. I choose to call myself that, and people sometimes say, well, we need to put away the past and move on. I thoroughly disagree, because you have to know the past in order to know where you're going. Everybody, no matter how transient, traumatized, or you are, or how lost you feel, everyone longs for a home. Okay, yeah. And I don't mean home simply as a structure where you live and where you have. It's a place where you feel welcome, a place that offers sanctuary and respite, a place that at any given time and place becomes the center of the universe. As Chicanos, our existence in the U.S. has a schizophrenic experience. They appealed to us only when our work or our service was needed as Americans, and discarded as Mexicans once our usefulness was no longer needed. A perfect example is World War II. I mean, we were drafted and expected to go and fight, and we thought that was going to change everything. That if we went and we fought and spilled our blood for democracy abroad, that it was going to be available to us when we came home. Obviously, that wasn't true. That wasn't true. So when I talk about naming myself, the struggles that we had to face is what gives me the right to call myself what I want to call myself. And so for me, the word Chicano is a personal choice. It's how I identify, but I have no problem with people calling themselves something else, but they should know their history.
I agree with you. Identity is a very, very personal thing. And sure. And I think that was part of the research that I did as a sociology major. And I just love the fluidity, I think, of identity. And I think depending on what's happening in society at the time and the era that you're in, things change and things take on a different meaning, and and it's sort of a new life on its own, depending on what that generation is experiencing. And so for me, the idea of calling yourself Spanish is really a fascinating thing. And now that we've got this idea, or this DNA testing availability to us, we know that we have different lineages and heritages and different cultures within us. And we've got Native American, we've got Spanish and French and Portuguese and Irish and German and all of these different cultures within us. But I think the one thing that I recall is just the fact that we were nationally under the Spanish crown for over 300 years in this area. And then 1821 came, and of course there was the Mexican government sort of took over our area, and so we were, Spanish under the Spanish crown up until 1821, from 1521, and then we were under the Mexican government from 1821 to 1848, so for 27 years. And then we became American in 1848 with the Mexican-American War. And so I think for some people, the interesting thing about that is that most of us never moved an inch. And if we did, it was between Chama and San Luis and Taos and Trinidad, and the areas that we were in. And it was the same gente, the same people, the same culture, the same language. We didn't have to do anything, but these national identities sort of changed without us even moving. And so for me, I think there's the one thing that we have that's a little bit different than anywhere else in Latin America when they gained their independence, was that we didn't have our own country, our own national identity. We're American. That is our national identity and our national culture. So I think that we evolved in a very different way, and I think that's why people sort of still adhere to that Spanish title, that Spanish identity there. And so it's very complex and fascinating to me. So it's just something I love to talk with people about, and so, so those kinds of things I think are what's important to tell in writing, and so that people understand this is where they're coming from when they say this, so like that little white kid understands that it isn't orphan county, it's huérfano county. Huérfano, exactly. Las Animas, the state, Colorado, it means red. If you look at that in and of itself, that's not an English word.
It's interesting that you talked about not moving an inch. That's one of the one of the examples I use when I teach is that imagine that you're living in Alamosa, Colorado in 1847. Mm-hmm. You're a Mexican, right? Mm-hmm. A year later, you're an American and you haven't moved an inch. Right. But you don't know the language of your new country, right? Mm-hmm. And the U.S. tells you, if you want to be a Mexican, you can now go 300 miles to the south, cross the Rio Grande, because that's your country. But we haven't moved an inch. We haven't moved an inch. Yeah. And we don't know the language, and we don't really know about George Washington chopping down the cherry tree or any of that. And so we instantly become a colonized people within our own country, within the country we once owned. And so we're, back in the Chicano movement days, we used to say, we didn't cross the border crossed us. Right. But if you really think about that saying, it's probably more true than not true.
It's
the border crossed us.
Extremely accurate. And think about, you talk about somebody that was born in 1847. Think about the person that was born in 1819, when under the Spanish crown. And then all of a sudden, this Mexican Revolution.
You're Mexican.
And they gained independence, but we weren't even a part of all of that because we were so far north and so isolated. But now all of a sudden, we're Mexican. And then 27 years later, all of a sudden we're American, and so it's fascinating to have three different national identities. And again, you haven't moved an inch. And so
and that sort of thing really needs to be taught, just like the Cesar Chavez Day in Colorado. These things may not mean much to some people, but it means everything to me to be able to recognize someone who we look up to as a hero and as a role model.
And there are so many more. There are so many more that here in Colorado, that are heroes that way. Corky Gonzalez is one of them.
Absolutely.
The people from San Luis that fought for La Sierra. There's lots of different people, women that have made a huge difference. And, that's what I'm hoping to do with this whole Successful in the San Luis Valley project that I'm doing, is highlight all of those heroes that you just talked about so that we all know. And hopefully, through social media, it'll get out a little bit faster than maybe in a book, but maybe one day it can be written in a book and maybe put into the history books. Just like, I don't know how many times I have been in a classroom and on the first day asked, what is the oldest town in Colorado? And nobody knows. Nobody knows. Or they say Leadville, or they say, I'm like, no. And I think through this work that we're doing, this writing that we're doing, and hopefully people will become more aware and understand that history a lot better. So going back to that, tell me about your writing and your published works.
Well, I'm not a prolific writer. I write in both languages. I seem to write when I'm overcome by something or an event, or to commemorate an idea or an emotion. Talk about someone who is important to me. Those seem to be about my poems. Obviously, I write love poems, probably like most poets do. But I think probably my best poems are the political poems that I write. And shortly after the confrontation with the Los Animas School Board, I wrote my first political poem. And I've been so when I my writing seems to always kind of fit the current political situation. I remember during the 80s, I wrote a lot about the struggles in Central America. But lately, I've begun to think about, in the autumn of my life, about what we're going to leave, for our children, so that they'll know that we were here. But I'm becoming increasingly introspective in terms of trying to assess my own life, what I've done right, what I've done wrong. I've always loved to read and write, due in large part to a high school teacher who saw something in me that I didn't see of myself. So I've always written. I have not really had a poem published one time in an anthology, but I am not a published writer or poet. I have submitted a partial manuscript to the Almargue Review, which is trying to recount my days in the Chicano Movement all the way from '69 to the present day. My earlier influences were Steinbeck, Hemingway, Walt Whitman. But then during the movement, I discovered Pablo Neruda, Octavio Paz, Carlos Fuentes, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I became really enamored with the way that the Latin American and Mexican writers wrote, and their use of mysticism and how we try to tell a story from a different point of view. A good example might be La Llorona. White folks might view that as a simple horror story, slasher movie, something to scare the hell out of you. Whereas La Llorona takes on a kind of a mystical characteristic for me as a weeping woman, a sorrowful woman, someone to be pitied or rather than feared. Somebody told me they saw a movie recently called La Llorona, and they said it's like trying to watch The Exorcist or something like that. That is just a total rob job as far as I'm concerned. In order to understand that, you have to really explore the mind of the Chicano or the Latino in us to describe, something like La Llorona. So, like I said, I probably maybe have 150 poems unpublished. I also am a playwright. I've written some original plays for the American GI Forum Skyline chapter. Mile High chapter, where I'm a member, and we perform these on the stage. Two serious pieces and 3 comedies. Comedy is the hardest thing there is to write. It really is. If you try and write something and you try and tell it and nobody laughs, you just die. You just die on the stage. So it's
they just
something
have
that yeah.
Talk it up to that.
So that's the extent of my writing. I'm hoping maybe to get a boost with my involvement with CALMA and maybe try and see about some publishing opportunities. It seems like to some degree we're the flavor of the month. Wow! And in that case, why aren't we more visible on the national stage?
The interesting thing about that is that we are out there. There are some fantastic films and literary works and plays that are out there. They just need the right marketing, I guess. For lack of better, I hate to say it that way in such a business sense, but it needs to get put out there. El Centro Su Teatro has been in Denver, probably 50 years. I don't know the exact number, but they have some of the funniest and most amazing, plays and programming, and the world needs to know more about them. All of the writers and the authors that we're working with through CALMA, your literary works, your poems need to be put in an anthology, and they need to be put out there. These other films that are, focused on what has happened with Latinos in history. The Milagro Beanfield War. It's a classic. How many people have seen that, outside of the Southwest? And they need to be more widespread. And I absolutely agree with you. We need to do more to get that voice heard. So, so thank you for sharing your journey.
You're welcome. And people and young people in particular, I guess. They need to know how they fit in to. They have to know their history, and they have to know their history within the context of American history. Yes. They have to be shown that their contributions help build this great country, and if they don't, if you can't show young people how they fit into it, how they contribute, then we're strangers. We are guests, permanent guests in somebody else's house. And I'm optimistic. I think the younger generation that's coming up today, I think they are full of a lot of empathy, and I think that they're more inclusive. I think that they reach out more to different people of different stripes, different orientations. So I'm optimistic about that. Obviously, there are some things that are kind of front burner. DACA, immigration, these are issues that need to be dealt with. So to the young people, oh, by the way, along the way, try and have some fun. It's still pretty good out there.
Yeah, we can't be too serious. We have to have fun, for sure. Well, thank you again for doing this interview with me, Ricardo. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, and you are just such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and I can't wait to see all of your poetry put into an anthology of some sort, and your plays as well, because those are things that people need to hear and need to read and see. And so it's been a blessing working with you through CALMA. And for everyone, Ricardo has done a short video on our website, www.calmaco.org, that sort of gives a brief explanation of what our mission and vision is and what our hope is to accomplish through this organization, and also an invitation to join us. So if you are a writer of any sort, please feel free to contact us and help us in this journey, in this quest to get our voices out there.
I would piggyback that by saying that if you are frustrated, as many of our people are, Kim said earlier that there are people out there who languish in obscurity because they just haven't had the opportunity to get their work seen or recognized. CALMA is trying to fix that. There may be people out there who have been writing for years, but for fear of rejection or whatever reason, have not had the work shown or published. You may be out there with the next Pulitzer Prize novel, just sitting in your basement or in your attic at home. Please take a chance and come forward and be heard. And that's the only way that we're really ever going to succeed in this country, is when people know who we are, that we're here, and that we've always been here.
Absolutely. And the other important thing that I want to add to that is one thing that you mentioned in your short video on our website is that it could be about Abuela's bizcochito recipe. It could be about the bonfongo recipe. It could be about, a poem about COVID, as you wrote. It could be about anything. Any genre is welcomed. You don't know what your work, what sort of impact your work might have on other people if you don't put it out there. There's somebody waiting to hear your voice and to be blessed by it. So please definitely reach out to CALMA and let's do this. Muchas gracias otra vez, Ricardo. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure as always, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
All right.
Thank you. Adios. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been a La Gente Legacy production and the CALMA series. Stay tuned for more.